we're going to do a little presentation just to give a bit of background and then open things up for questions. So, Better Together is basically about accessible learning in the time of COVID. So this is just the players who are here on our panel today. So there's myself and my colleague Amanda Manning, Anne Comfort from Mount Allison, Marissa and Ian from Acadia, all working in student accessibility services. So just to give a bit of an idea of who we are, so it's easy to say who the people's names are, but just our offices and what we offer exactly. So in order to support students living with disabilities, each post-secondary institution has an office or a service that provides accommodations to students living with disabilities. They also provide advocacy and accessible learning opportunities. So it looks very different in each institution, and we'll outline that a little bit for the differences between our three. But so here today, ours at Bishop's, our office is called Student Accessibility and Accommodation Services, which we call SAF, just much easier to say. Mount Allison has the Megan Center, and Acadia has their Accessible Learning Services. And please correct me if I'm wrong, my colleagues, because I just took that information from my own search. Okay, so Amanda, if you wanted to hop on and talk about learning profiles.
Okay, so we want to start by outlining that learning is a complex cognitive activity. It's a complex cognitive task that relies on a lot of different factors. I'm not sure if anyone's familiar with Todd Rose and his book, The End of Average, but he's a Harvard education and psychology research professor, and he outlines the different factors that can make up a learning profile. What the research shows is that there is a tremendous amount of variability between learners, and that the term average doesn't even really exist when you're looking at a learning profile. So learners can have such variability within and outside the range of what is considered average that we end up seeing what is referred to as a jagged learning profile, which is something that we outline here in our diagram. And this is just within the general student population. And so what happens when a disability impacts or impedes the learning process? So the Charter of Human Rights and Freedoms that each of our institutions adheres to outlines that disability, or the means to palliate a disability, is a prohibitive ground of discrimination. And that means that if there are barriers to education or learning, it's our legal obligation to provide accommodations up until the point of undue hardship. And so disabilities take many different shapes and forms. There are the more visible disabilities that we can see and maybe understand more intuitively based on the presence of things like a wheelchair or a walking stick or a service dog. However, there are also many emerging disabilities that are not detectable on the surface. These are also called the invisible disabilities. And these can include learning disabilities of various kinds, attention deficit and hyperactivity disorder, or disabilities due to mental health problems. And in the framework of human rights, there is no hierarchy of disabilities within human rights law. So there's no one disability that is deemed, more disabling than another.
We wanted to speak a little bit about this all in the context of COVID-19 and everything that's gone down in the last several months. For us, the date was March 13th when everything closed down and we had to move everything online. Excuse me. It's added an additional layer of complexity for everyone, not just students, for professors, for employees, for everybody that has been living in today's day and age. It's been a very big challenge. So there's no denying the impact that this has had on everything. So for some, the transition was smooth, and even for some students, I've had some students living with disabilities that have told me, this is wonderful. I really appreciate not being in class. And for others, it's actually been a very big challenge. So, for some, it may have even cost them a semester and not being able to continue with their studies depending on the struggles that they have been facing. So it's just important to understand the context and the impact that COVID has had, and that's why we thought it would be important to have this kind of conversation. All right, so we wanted to just kind of take it back to the concrete, more about accommodation specifically. And there's generally 3 different types of accommodations, and there may be some points that my colleagues from the East Coast might want to add in, because it might be a little bit different here in Quebec than it is there. So please feel free to jump in as we move forward, and let us know what it's like for you in your part of the country. In class accommodation, so sometimes you'll see there's so many different kinds, but you'll see flexibility with deadlines. So sometimes it might be because students lack the kind of structure that they need, or they need extra support to get themselves organized. It's something that we here at Bishop's really try and plan ahead of time. So we work with our students to make sure that they have that support to get them through and not have to ask for flexibility, but sometimes it's something that we have to work with them. We try and work with the professors as well in those situations. So considerations regarding aspects of class participation. So there can be challenges for students either presenting in front of a class or doing presentations for many reasons. There could be, extreme anxiety, or now online there's been some different challenges which for us on our end we didn't necessarily foresee. But having that flexibility can sometimes help a student if they maybe do a one-on-one presentation or a pre-recorded presentation. So there's different options. But those are based on for each individual student. And then we have note-taking services, and then there's room and environmental adaptation. So sometimes, we have to adapt a classroom for a particular student, or a specific, room, or whatever the case. These are things that we have done in the past and continue to do.
I'm Marissa, I'm from Acadia. Occasionally we do see accommodations around preferential seating. So for example, seating closer to the front of the room. So that's working with faculty members to, basically have a seat open for a student if they need to have that preferential seating.
Very good point. Yes, I think that's something we definitely do here at BU as well. And for any accommodation, we work with the student individually to see what they absolutely need for their situation and their needs. So the coordinators in each department will make a plan, and sometimes it's different from one class to another. So depending on the content of the course and the type of disability, sometimes it has to be adapted. So it's a kind of a continual working process, and it's a very collaborative process as well. So the next one is out of class accommodations. So these are more support that our offices provide. So developing organizational skills and time management, trying to make a plan for studying and assignments. So that can be challenging for students that don't struggle with disabilities, but there's certain situations where you would need more help. There's also environmental adaptations. So these are things adapting residence rooms or dining hall or other, making sure that elevators are functional and that the campus is accessible as well physically. And there's so many that we could speak about, but that's basically out of class accommodations. So there's also, I've seen that Acadia offers some workshops and one-on-one coaching with students, I believe. So that's something I think that Marissa will speak about a bit later as well. And then the final one is assessments. So these kind of accommodations would look like extra time on exams, specific assistive software. That can also be in a classroom. On a personal computer, and a reader or a scribe. So, and again, these aren't the only accommodations. These are things that we see pretty commonly. So having extra time on exams will let a learner be able to think about their answer and plan out what they're doing before they have to give them the time and they're not pressured to complete their exam. So yeah, that's assessment. And I think Mount Allison, there was something different about the reader scribe at Mount A.
Yeah, so we've moved away quite a few years ago from hiring readers and scribes, and we've moved to a model where we are training students to be more independent. So moving them to a reading software or a dictation software and really taking the time over the summer before they arrive and when they do come in September to be familiar with that. We're really trying to help them be more independent. The other thing that allows us to do is we could have 3 or 4 people in the same room on their own computers with headsets and microphones listening to a text being read to them, where when we used to have a reader, then you're limited to 1 student and 1 reader in a room. So it allowed us to open up that as well.
Thanks for that. That's very interesting. Okay, so I wanted to take a bit of time to talk about universal design for learning. So Amanda spoke earlier about different learner profiles and the jagged learning profile and the variability in learning on its own, regardless of disability. So the one way that this can be addressed is using a universal design for learning. So having to transition online quickly has made this even more pertinent. UDL is a set of design principles to guide teachers and professors in reducing learning barriers for students. So it's done through improving motivation, presenting information in a variety of ways, and expanding how students can express their understanding. And the philosophy that is behind UDL is that all students should be able to access learning in accessible and diverse ways, and ensure that all students are given a chance to succeed. So by making all lessons and course material universally accessible, the need for accommodations specifically for students with disability would be reduced significantly, because all learners would be inherently accommodated by accessibility. So UDL ideally addresses all learning styles and all physical, cognitive, mental, emotional, and learning disabilities. It's not an end-all or a fix-all, but it's definitely a way that we can address, especially with the transition online, is when we're planning our content, making it universal so that we can at least remove as many barriers as possible right from the get-go. I don't know if this, okay, so I can talk about this one. So what does all this mean? So this basically ties in that, this has been a challenge for both professors and students. And that's why we're better working together. So collaborating with our offices and professors and students and trying to come together and collaborate is really hopefully will make navigating this online world that we've been thrown into more successful. And I think that having these kind of conversations definitely starts that process of working together and making it better together. I like the hashtag, actually. We should make something like that and keep it. We'll use it on our Instagram profile or something. So, okay, so what we're hearing at Bishop. So we'll each talk about specific to our institution. So moving online for us was quite a bit of a challenge. It happened overnight, actually in a day. Like, in the morning I went into work and in the afternoon we were transitioning online. But we continued to provide all of our services online at a distance. So we had no software, so we really focused on getting the information to the students and the professors. We even sent out new class lists of students just so that they had it easily accessible. In the spring semester, so we were going into our spring semester, usually we have a very small number of students receiving accommodations. We had a 50% increase in students registered in our services. So that also was a big curveball, having to manage that increase. So moving forward for the fall, we're doing the hybrid model as many institutions are doing. So we have the in-person only, in-person and online with scheduled time. online with a scheduled time and online with no scheduled time. So those are the different models, which is something that I think is adding a new layer of complexity for our department, because now we have all of these other factors. So usually it was just an in-class situation, but now we're kind of dealing with many more factors, but we're up for the challenge. And our focus this summer is really much preparing for fall. So we are integrating a software, which is something that has been quite difficult for our team, but we're managing. So that'll be a big help for the students, faculty, and the coordinators. And meeting with students ahead of time. So we're already meeting with students throughout the summer and making sure that we get files ready and taken care of and prepared for their arrival in the fall. And also we have our 23 university students that were hired, and they are there as consultants with faculty members and to prepare them for the fall and to support them, I think, throughout the fall. And now I just realized what that acronym was, sad. So I asked a question in the chat before. So yeah, so I'll pass it over to, I think it's Marissa who's next.
Yeah, so for the fall, Acadia is also doing the hybrid model. What we saw for this last term, what was, like Theresa was saying, it was quite a quick change from the in-class to the online format. So we were seeing faculty posting their lecture notes and their PowerPoints for what they were doing online, and then we also saw some faculty members posting lecture notes and PowerPoints for the whole term. So that was just to allow their whole class to see what was going on. It helped with that transition to the online, so that way students could not only review what was learned, but also adapt to that online. Our learning technologies and instructional design and tech services department, they did a fantastic job with supporting faculty with how to transition online and supporting if there was any issues with anything technology. So whether that's something couldn't post or something wasn't working. So they did a phenomenal job with that, making recommendations on how to make things online. And then we also worked closely with those departments and faculty too, as far as how to make things accessible with that online delivery. As far as technology goes, Ian and I were both researching and, constantly keeping up to date on what assistive technology there is out there, whether that's, what's already built into the computers to what new systems are out there. That could be text to speech, speech to text, note-taking software, so things like that. We're also meeting with students throughout the summer. Obviously, we're still working remotely, but that's we're meeting with prospective students almost daily still. So just getting ready for the fall as far as that goes. And then as far as our workshops for this fall goes, so we do a lot of workshops throughout the semester. So there's usually 7 per week. We're not sure if we're going to stay with that number or increase them, but they will be virtual, but they're still going to be around information such as, organization, time management, and even self-advocacy skills. Writing emails was a big one that we saw. How to prepare for tests, how to prepare for presentations. So those are just a few examples of the topics that we had, but we're also looking, because our semester is starting a bit later in September, we're also going to be working on workshops around stress management, how to prepare for the fall, different ways to introduce yourself to your professor. So that's another big thing that we try to encourage students to do, is reach out to your professors. So even if it's just a quick hello at the beginning of the term, you get to know your professors as the semester starts and goes along. So that's just a general kind of overview on where we're at right now. Ian, I don't know if you have anything to add or.
Yeah, hi, thanks, Marissa. Yeah, I'm in a bit of a unique position because I came to Acadia right at the beginning of COVID, and so I've only ever experienced Acadia online, and so this will be my first September. But yeah, Marissa and I have both been talking a lot about UDL and sort of taking the approach of supporting faculty in sort of being flexible to implement. Perhaps for a lot of, for most professors, likely a bit of a different kind of model, universal design for learning. And so really we want to highlight the flexibility we have. to sort of helping professors manage a new model of learning for their students with accessibility in mind. And we really think that will improve for everyone's learning. So yeah, one other thing I'll add with the workshops is I also intend to do some stress management workshops. So acknowledging that stress is going to be a big aspect of the sudden change to learning online in our hybrid model. So I look forward to doing that. I'm looking forward to September and getting, seeing how it goes. So thanks.
Thanks, Ian. So last but not least is Anne with Mount A.
Hi. So I think one of the great things about going last in this series is that a lot of the same things that the other two institutions saw are what we saw. When we had to make that decision to go online, one of the things that we saw was a divide in the students for whom they already had their technology, they knew how to use it, they had the software and it was working really well, and those that didn't. So really quickly, the staff at the Meehan Center were able to get some of that technology into students' hands. So we already have a lending library of equipment for students with disabilities. And if you went in our room right now where we have that, it's empty. It's all out there. Students are using it. So that was great. We ran into some issues with internet access. That's really a privilege in this country. So that became a workaround, and really, I've got to say the professors really stepped up. So there were, some situations where I was calling a student at night, emailing the professor the next morning, trying to figure it out. And really hats off to the profs at Mount A that really helped us figure out the technology pieces, the internet pieces, making sure that the accommodations were there. We did, interestingly enough, see a decline in the number of students that reached out to us at the end of the winter semester looking for accommodations, because a lot of our profs had built-in features to their new form of evaluating that meant that students didn't need something extra because it was going to be built in for everyone. So that was really great. In the fall, we've got a hybrid model as well. So we've got sort of three options of scheduled online instruction that's going to have an on-campus element, and online instruction only. So that's very similar to what some other schools are doing. We have about 700 students that are going to be living in our residences. So one of the things that normally this time of year I'm doing is negotiating with housing for students that have an accessibility issue in a room that they need an accommodation for. And many of those now have been resolved simply by the fact that we're not going to have any shared residence rooms. Everyone's going to have a single. So for those students that have anxiety, that have depression, the fact that they now have a single room means that they don't need to go through me in order to access one of those. Our pre-orientation that we would normally run every year, so that's whereby I would be bringing students with disabilities in 3 days before everyone else comes, has unfortunately had to been canceled. We've got self-isolation requirements that need to happen. So instead, we've completely moved that online and virtual, and working with those student leaders that run that program to make sure that that's there. Our professors have engaged with conversations around UDL. Our staff has been asked to sit at the table and to talk about academic matters for the fall, have been asked by professors for input on their course syllabi. They've really been encouraged by that. The university has hired some technology interns that are helping, leverage the most we can out of the platforms that we already use. We use a platform called Accommodate and that was invaluable. If we hadn't had that in the spring, I think we would have been in a real mess. It allowed my staff to remotely be able to go into that system, verify for a prof the accommodations that needed to be in place. There are other features of that platform that we had never used before that this fall we plan to use. So one of them, for example, is an ability for a student to go into that and book an appointment with a staff person. So without having to do that email back and forth, are you free, when are you free? So we plan to open that one up, because one of the things that we know is that we need to keep students safe, we need to keep staff safe. So where at all possible, we're going to be having virtual team appointments with students. When we have to meet face-to-face, then we'll make sure that we're protecting both the student and the staff to do that. But we plan to release that with the Accommodate platform. So that's sort of what's happening at Mount A.
Thanks so much, Anne. We're actually integrating Accommodate in the fall, so we're in our process right now. So we went through a spring without it. It was quite tough, but we're looking forward to bringing that to campus. Okay, so that is, I wanted to kind of open the floor, excuse me, open the floor for discussion, maybe some, just some questions that might provoke some thoughts. So what do we foresee in the fall? What are some challenges that we have encountered? And I wanted to put the other one, so what are some positive points and wins and things that we've seen that have worked? So I wanted those two together. And what are some concerns moving forward? And what can our offices do to help moving forward as well? So, as much as we love questions, I think that it would be nice to hear, what else we can do as well, what we can all do to help each other.